We're all good now. You're on.
Many of us have heard the myth or fact that the Eskimos have a large number of words for snow. Sometimes it's 20, sometimes it's 50, sometimes it's 200. As I'm prone to do with many things, I analyzed this claim and realized several fascinating things about it. We like these claims because they are surprising. They aren't something we would have thought of off the top of our heads. But more importantly, they're believable. They make sense. In the case of the Eskimos, it makes sense that they would have many words for snow because they live in a snowy environment. In more general terms, the untranslatable words, the words for snow in the Eskimo language, exist because of a unique aspect of the culture, namely the snowy environment. I got to wondering, can this logic be applied to other languages and other words? So when the symposium came up, I was like, hey, let's research this, and this became my thesis. Untranslatable words come about because of unique aspects of the culture. Because of this, we can predict parts of a culture from its untranslatable words. To test this, I need to do two things. The first is I need to find the untranslatable words. I defined an untranslatable word as one that has no one-to-one equivalent in the English language. This takes into account nuances in the definition. An example of this is taka, which is Finnish for a large herd of reindeer, or a herd especially of reindeer. I would consider this still untranslatable because while we have the word herd, it includes the caveat, especially of reindeer. After finding these untranslatable words, I needed to find a connection with the source culture. In some cases, this is pretty easy. In the case of taka, it makes sense that they would have this word because they have reindeer. We don't, so we don't have the word for it. In many cases, though, the connection is much more subtle. An example of this is komorebe, which is Japanese for a sunlight effect of sun shining through leaves of trees. Now, the sun shines through trees here, so why don't we have a word for it? While the connection is not immediately apparent, there is one which I will get into later. The easiest words to find are what I call non-existent nouns. These are words that name a particular thing that just doesn't exist here. These words like jicama, which is a Mexican root vegetable, or taka, the Finnish word for reindeer. These are very clear category, and there's a direct correlation between this word for something that doesn't exist and it being untranslatable. With these, if we need to talk about the item, we will often import the name. For example, jicamas are often used in cooking, especially in the Southwest, but we will just import the Mexican name for them instead of creating our own. Most words, however, are much more murky. These are words where we understand the concept, but we don't have a word for it. An example of this is pochimuchka, a person who asks too many questions. I'm sure we all know someone like this. With no visible connection, I dismissed my thesis not working in this case. However, then I realized maybe there's something much more subtle going on. Maybe the Russian culture has stricter cultural expectations. Maybe the Russians are more consistent. Someone who is once a pochimuchka is always a pochimuchka. This is purely speculation, but the possibility is still there. A case where I was able to confirm the subtle relationships is the Mexican word sobremesa. Literally translated, it means above the table. This Mexican word means a leisurely time after eating lunch, spent visiting, conversing, relaxing, and enjoying time with friends. Based on my thesis, this would suggest the Mexican culture is more relaxed, relationship-oriented, and puts relationships ahead of timeliness. After positing this, I interviewed several native Spanish speakers from Costa Rica and Mexico who confirmed that these are indeed aspects of the Mexican and Spanish cultures. Another word which suggests this relaxed nature of the culture is simpatico, which is a compatible, friendly person who you feel like you could become good friends with because of their similarities with you. The word simpatico could easily exist in that culture, in that language, and not ours, due to their culture being more focused on relationships and less on time efficiency. Another great example of understanding a concept, but not having a word for it, is como rebe, which I mentioned earlier in my introduction. Como rebe means sunlight through trees, or the dappled effect of such, something most of us probably know. So why do they have a word for it? Why not us? As it turns out, the Japanese culture, nature plays a much larger role. Here is natural objects are present in a significant portion of art. Here's the Google search for Japanese art. You can see that natural objects are visible in most of them. Gardens are also considered an art form and have spiritual and philosophical aspects as well as a visual one. Outside temples, there will often be a garden, which is an extension of the sacred space as opposed to just decoration. Haikus, the Japanese poetry form, also show this reverence for nature in several ways. Many haikus, especially traditional ones, talk about nature as the subject. However, even when the topic is not nature, there's a hidden connection in the kigo, or season word. The standard part of the haiku form indicates when the verse is set. It's a word like wisteria for early summer, or moon for fall. An excellent example of this in a haiku is the following poem by Yosaku-san. In the moonlight, the color and scent of the wisteria seems far away. Now on the surface, it just says, hey, it's nighttime. There's wisteria over there, it's far away. But once you recognize the kigo in it, there's a hidden meaning that comes out. It's talking about how fall has come and the beginning of summer is far away. This demonstration of nature's importance in the haiku form reiterates the value the Japanese culture places on nature. In addition to words, idioms can also be untranslatable. An idiom is a phrase with a double meaning. It has a literal part and a figurative part. An example from English is the term piece of cake. Literally, it means a slice of dessert. However, most of us, probably all of us, will recognize that it also means something exceptionally easy or simple. This is the figurative part. I consider an idiom to be untranslatable when the figurative part does not translate, even if the literal part does. An example of this from Costa Rica is pelo de gato, which literally means cat's hair, which is perfectly translated. However, in Costa Rica, it means fine rain, often breezy, that appears as fine lines in the air, probably its namesake. This is distinct from our term drizzle, which is a slow rain but has normal-sized drops. The implications of pelo de gato are pretty straightforward. If they have the term that we don't, they must have the rainflow that we don't. This is backed up by pelo de gato being common in the rainforests that make up much of Costa Rica. After finding pelo de gato, I looked for other Costa Rican terms for rain. Along with the translatable phrases aguacero for downpour and guara for drizzle, I found the untranslatable word temporal, which means a rainstorm lasting multiple days. This is different from our similar word tempest, which is a windy storm but does not have an associated length. Temporals are common in the environment of Costa Rica, which explains the existence of the word. These examples that I just mentioned can be grouped into environmental words. Many environmental words are untranslatable because while art and culture are portable along with their respective terms, the environment is not. It's a geographic thing, so we don't have any need to import an environmental word for something that can't occur here. Speaking of environmental words, let's look at the Eskimo claim. To process this, we must not use the term Eskimo, which does not actually refer to a specific population of people and is now considered vulgar. Instead, we will use Inuit, which refers to a specific population and is probably what was originally intended. As it turns out, yes, they have many snow-related words, more than English, although impossible to put a number on. Primarily, However, this is not because of the environment, as my thesis would suggest, but because of the language structure. The Inuit use a system of stackable suffixes called postspaces. This is as if adverbs, adjectives, and sometimes verbs and nouns are suffixes that you just add on to the end of the base word. An example from an Inuit language is somewhere. Not on the slides. Is aniluk, which means to go through deep snow. This is composed of anu, which means packed snow, and luk, which means to experience. This is as if the English terms snowdrift, snowflake, blowing snow were each single words. So, at its basis, the claim is true, but not for the same reasons as we might think, and it's impossible to attach a number to. Even though the primary cause of the Inuits' numerous words for snow is their language structure and not their environment, my thesis may still come into play. While many of their words for snow have equivalent English phrases, their words are much more nuanced. When we say to go through deep snow, we're talking about an action. However, when they say aniluk, they're naming a concept. In general, the Inuit culture has more ways to describe snow than the US culture, almost definitely because of their polar environment. As I have dug through many untranslatable words, I've noticed distinct categories emerge. The first of these is non-existent nouns, like hikuma or taka. These are very clear-cut, definitive category where the non-existence of the object they refer to directly correlates with the untranslatability of the word. The second category is environmental words, somewhat of a subdivision of non-existent nouns. These untranslatable words are very prevalent because, while art and culture are portable, the environment is not. Other words focus on aesthetics, art, and culture. These are a much more murky area with more subtle connections. Instead of saying something about the culture, they often whisper it. Even when we import the culture, we will bring the words with it too. The majority of the words I looked at had a connection, some obvious, some convoluted or subtle. Of course, there are exceptions. We are humans, so there will always be words that have nothing to do with anything and just sort of happen to be there. These are the outliers, though, and most untranslatable words can lend insight into their culture.
Wanted to call a special guest speaker, and so Rick